were you raised by both parents?
Yes.
Father and mother in the home?
Yes.
And as a result, you didn't get in a lot of trouble and carry on like that?
Well, I mean, I think we all get in trouble. I think,
but as a result of having both parents in the home, you didn't get in as much trouble as those kids do that don't have both parents at home?
Nah, I mean, I definitely did because I was with the kids that didn't have both parents at home. I think we all.
So you're saying yes, you did as much damage as they did? You know, you mentioned that white schools are better, more qualified, or better equipped than the black schools. Why don't the black teachers and black principals and school board, why don't they care enough about the blacks to make sure that their schools are brought up in the same manner that the white schools are? Why don't they care enough about the blacks to do that?
Well, I think this is the issue, right? Because at my school, I had some phenomenal educators, some phenomenal administrators who supported us. I mean, some of them were problematic, others were really good. So I think with that, the real issue isn't necessarily, right, like, why don't they care enough? Because I think they do. I think the issue is resources. When we look at schools and school funding, for example, schools are funded by property taxes, right? And if everybody who lives in a particular area is a renter and they're not paying property taxes, then how are the schools going to get that additional funding to hire those teachers who are more qualified to then teach those AP courses? To give you another example of what that looks like, at my school in the 10th grade, we had a geometry teacher, or we didn't have a solid geometry teacher. So for 10th grade geometry, right, like we had 5 different teachers over the year and we stayed in chapter 1. So how are we supposed to perform well to get more performance-based funding from the federal government if we don't have consistent educators?
Is that a money issue or like a teacher doing the right thing issue?
Well, it's absolutely a money issue, right?
So you're saying that if the black teachers had more money, they would have done better in that class?
No, I'm saying that if the school districts had more money to hire and retain the talent that they need to, right, then they would do it. But oftentimes these school districts don't. As a matter of fact,
they do get the money, but the blacks misuse the money. The administration, the so-called leaders of the black community, they keep it for themselves rather than investing it into the school. Were you aware of that?
Well, I mean, I think there is some truth to that, but I think it's a lot more complicated than that.
What do you mean? Right? Either you're stealing the money or you're not. You can't get anything simpler than that.
Well, no, it's not necessarily that simple. Some parts of it are fiscal mismanagement. Other parts of it, right, are not having the fiscal resources at all.
A lot of teachers tell me they can't teach the black kids because the black kids are so out of order. They can't contain them or control them because they're like acting out in classes. They're threatening the teachers. They won't respect the adults. How do you deal with that kind of stuff?
Well, for one, right, like I think that's highly problematic. To give you an example, I, as a community-based educator, while I was working with SJLI, and now in my new position as the manager of the Brother Son Selves Coalition, we work with young people who have been pushed out of schools. You know, we had worked with young people who were literally incarcerated in juvenile hall, right? And we were able to manage our classrooms and stuff just fine. I think oftentimes there's an underlying assumption that people walk into in those classrooms that these kids can't learn, so I'm going to treat them as that. But if you don't walk in with that assumption and you walk in with something like our friends from Californians for Justice would call a relationship-centered approach, right, then it's much more easier to engage young people and to teach them. When you have adults specifically who don't necessarily want to invest and don't want to build relationships with young people because you don't care about them or you don't like them, then that becomes the problem.
Is that a
and
problem?
Kids are going to respond.
Is that a problem? A lot of the black teachers, they don't feel like dealing with those kind of kids.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even just say that's a black teacher thing. I think that's a broader...
Well, that's who mostly complain about the black kids or the black teachers.
No,
especially the black female teachers.
I would say that's a teacher thing. I would say that's a broader... Because again, right, like if we look at, for example, if we look at some of the data on school suspensions, right? Like the data on school suspensions would suggest that the majority of people being suspended are black kids, particularly black boys.
Right.
Right. But oftentimes, black boys are suspended for violations that other kids might get detention for. Other kids might just get sent out the classroom for.
The black boys, not all, but most, tend to fight in class, fight the teacher, curse the teachers out, rude in the classrooms, and so they will get thrown out, whereas the white kids tend to be more respectful in the classroom. They don't curse and fight and carry on like that. How should the teachers deal with the black kids acting that way?
Well, I mean, I think the issue, right, is that, if you frame it as that, you would think that it's only a black kid problem. I've certainly been in spaces where, where white kids would act the same exact way, but black kids are criminalized for doing the same things that white kids get therapy for. Right?
So how should the teacher deal with the black kids acting that way?
But, well, I think the issue is it's not how should the teachers deal with the black kids acting that way. The issue is, well, what's the underlying problem?
What is the underlying problem?
Well, oftentimes the underlying problems are a lot of the things that young people walk into classes with. Young people walk into classes, addressing trauma at home, addressing things that happen outside of the class, addressing things that may be going on with their peers. And again, right, like at a school, like let's say, for example, a Phillips Exeter Academy, which is, a private boarding school on the East Coast, like 60% of their alum go to Ivy League colleges, right? Like those kids have more drugs. Those kids have more things than any of the kids in our neighborhoods do. But the issue is that when they're going through stuff, they are giving resources and tools to succeed.
So is it a white school?
Well, it's a private elite school.
Is it white?
I mean, they have a white population, but
is it majority white? I've not heard of it. That's what I'm asking. Is it majority white or something?
I mean, well, the majority of a lot of these boarding schools, not only are they majority white, but they're also majority wealthy, right? So even if they are racially diverse, right, the average income bracket, right, like these are folks that the 1% where they would send their kids to.
But the school you just mentioned, is that a predominantly white school back east?
One of them, yeah.
Okay. Were you raised by both parents?
Yes.
Father and mother in the home?
Yes.
And as a result, you didn't get in a lot of trouble and carry on like that?
Well, I mean, I think we all get in trouble. I think.
But as a result of having both parents in the home, you didn't get in as much trouble as those kids do that don't have both parents at home?
Nah, I mean, I definitely did because I was with the kids that didn't have both parents at home. I think we all. So
you're saying yes, you did as much damage as they did?
The issue isn't that I did as much damage as they did. I think, again, teenagers, regardless of, whether they have two parents in the home, whether they have, just a working mom or both parents are working or no parents are working, right? Like teenagers do stuff because they're teenagers.
So did you cause as much problem having two parents at home as those kids did who did not have two parents at home?
Well, again, I think that's not the case, right? Because some of that stuff is conflicting, right? So my mother passed while I was in high school, right? And then we shifted over to a single parent household with my dad leading that, right? Like, so that same narrative doesn't necessarily fit neatly. I have a lot of friends who, went through all kind of different things, but it wasn't because that their parents were not at home.
What I'm trying to find out is, did you get in as much trouble as a result of having two parents at home as opposed to those kids who did not have two parents?
Well, again, right, how are you
get in that much trouble?
How are you defining trouble?
Fights and break-ins and acting out of orderly and the schools and things. Did you do all that as a result of having parents in the home?
Well, I don't think that was a result of having parents in the home.
So your two parents didn't play a role in your life at all as far to how you conducted yourself when you were out?
Well, I think the challenge to what you're asking or how you're framing it is that parents and parents alone are the thing that's going to stop that.
Well, I haven't gotten to that yet. I'm just asking, having the two parents in the home, did that impact you differently than it did with the kids who did not have two parents in the home as far as how to carry yourself and act when you're out in public? Did that impact you?
Well, I think it would be a lie to say that it didn't. I think the issue isn't that,
But did it
right?
impact you in a good way?
I mean, of course it did, right?
And so, if
But
those
that's
other
not the.
kids had two parents at home, is there a possibility that they would be impacted by having, in a good way, by having two parents at home as well?